right, everybody. So today on the podcast, we have Atlas Power Shrugged. How we doing, man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I was excited for this talk because obviously we have not had a podcast together yet. I've certainly had plenty of repeats on, and I definitely don't want to say you are newer in the space, but I've seen you, more recently, and I think I saw you. It must have been maybe a year or so ago, and you were doing some of these interesting exercises. And I just remember somebody posted and was like, "Oh, look, this is why you don't need to listen to Stu McGill, for example, or something like that, as far as like the back flexion being an issue." And I just kind of saw a post. And then I saw somebody else mention you. I saw somebody else mention you. I was like, okay. And then you were recently in one Honestly Nice's podcast, and we can talk about that as well. So for people who are not yet familiar with you, can you give a little bit of your background, both as far as like lifting, but also in this space?
Yeah, so I guess I am kind of newer in this space. For a long time, it was just a hobby that um, I wasn't trying to be a fitness professional or anything.
Yeah.
Um, Basically, I was a lot like probably a lot of lifters, kind of following that power building style program, just putting a lot of emphasis on the squat, bench, conventional deadlift, maybe not nearly as much emphasis as I should on the accessories, but, going in enthusiastically, doing those all the time. And then, maybe not doing everything else, to the extent that I should, but got to a decent place, a place a lot of people would be fairly happy with, and I thought, okay, it's okay. Um, but yeah, it was kind of the routine I was stuck in, that kind of power building. And I'm not saying you could have done power building obviously better than I did, but just kind of I think that a lot of people are kind of a place a lot of people kind of get stuck in, just like with a lot of emphasis on your peak performance on your big three and not as much emphasis on anything else. So then when the lockdowns happened in 2020, obviously gym shut down and I had to find something else to do. I started experimenting with a lot of older lifts, like old time, like bronze era lifts from the early 1900s, because I'd always kind of known in the back of my head, hey, these guys got a lot done with very minimal equipment. So when the opportunity to just go in and max out on deadlift and squat and bench was taken away from me. I had to figure out something to do with just a barbell. I had a barbell and I was able to get, I think, 185 pounds of plates fairly quickly. So I had to figure out some stuff to do with that. And lo and behold, a lot of these older exercises started actually working really well. I was making progress, actually starting to move better instead of being just kind of an immobile meathead.
Yeah, yeah.
And, that rabbit hole just kind of, yeah, as I started doing more, stuff people weren't seeing as much and actually making progress from it, started to pick up steam on Instagram. I had everyone asked about my username. I just made my Instagram because my wife told me that I couldn't like memes with her Instagram account. I didn't have one, so she made me make an Instagram, and I
Right,
came
right.
up with Atlas Power Shrugged in like 5 minutes. It's just
Okay.
like a pun on power shrugs because I like doing power shrugs because I like having big traps. I wasn't trying to like state my politics for
Right.
forever. So I'm not I'm not an objectivist or a libertarian or anything. I like power shrugs, and that was
Yeah.
the I really didn't understand the significance of what I was doing at the time. I was really just making an Instagram. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
think it was
that's
ever going to go
funny.
anywhere. So anyway, yeah. So I got so that's when I started to gain traction, and since then I've focused on a lot of the old school lifts from the bronze era, silver era, but not with the mentality of just doing historical reenactment, doing everything that they did verbatim, just kind of looking at some of the stuff that may have been forgotten by our industry and seeing, was this for a good reason or is there some stuff that got left out that really we
So
ought to
what
put
are
on?
some of those lists for people who are listening? Like, because I know there's a couple that people really kind of you got known for.
I mean, there's too many to quickly summarize, but there's stuff like one hand variations on a lot of lifts we see now, like the one hand deadlift,
Mm.
even the one hand snatch and one hand clean and jerk actually used to be part of the Olympics at one time. They got yeah, so I mean those are really cool. I mean the one hand deadlift I think is very it's actually very practical too. The one hand clean
Yeah.
and jerk are a little bit less practical. One hand snatch is actually surprisingly practical if you're just because it has a lower um difficulty curve, or it's more accessible if you don't want to get too invested in technique than the two hand actually, but then you can get insanely invested in it and do like one hand squat snatches. I mean, back in the day, Charles Rigelow did like 254, I think, in the one hand snatch. Crazy technique. But you can also just do a
Yeah.
complete meathead power snatch. Anybody can just go in and do that. So I think it's actually pretty cool. In addition to that, you've got stuff like the bent press, which is a technique for levering your body under a weight held in one hand to kind of use the strength of your whole body to press
Mm.
up phenomenal weights. And then you've got more practical stuff like pullovers, the Jefferson curl, which is essentially a weighted pike stretch.
And that's one
Um,
I know you got known for to some degree, right?
yeah, because that one's one that has a ton of practical benefit. You've got stuff like Zerchers, which are kind of anachronistically considered like old time because Zercher lifts weren't as especially common actually back in the day. They were invented back then,
Hmm.
but they were not especially common like in the bronze or silver eras for the most part. They actually become more popular now, but they're still kind of seen as that like kind of old school lift. But yeah, those are kind of some of the good summary of the lifts there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I do want to actually go back and check specifically like some of your videos on them because it's not something. I mean, I've been lifting for almost 20 years, and I've tried a lot, and something that people will recognize on the channels. I've tried a lot of different routines, and I've always been very consistent. But I will occasionally try like a different split and whatnot. But I can't say I've done anything much as far as well, two areas. One, like traditional weightlifting, I've done pretty much nothing with that. And then these old school lifts, I've done pretty much nothing there. I actually, Glenn Pendelay.
Yeah.
So there was back in like 2000, geez, this must have been like 2008 or so on T Nation. And he was on there and he had a thread and he was talking about the benefits of snatches and whatnot. So I'm just in my basement, like probably 140 pounds at the time with an easy curl bar, trying to do snatches with that and getting his response on my form. And he was like, bro, like, what do you want me to tell you? You're doing like easy curl snatches here. So that's basically the
Yeah.
extent of it for me.
Yes, that two hand snatches are hard. I'm not even gonna lie. That's yeah, that's you have to really get into it to be good at those. My one hand snatch is actually not that far from my two hand snatch, just because
Really.
the difficulty curve is so much less
Mm.
on the latter, but or on the former rather.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I've done like meathead power cleans, behind the neck jerks, and one arm snatches, but not a whole lot of like real Olympic lifting either.
Yeah, and I think a couple people mentioned that you're a taller lifter too, which sometimes people talk about it being harder to fill out. So for the ever curious among us, what's like generally height and weight?
6'0" to 22 right now.
Okay.
Everybody thinks I'm taller than that because everybody lies about being 6 feet.
Yeah.
Like everyone like 5'10" and above is 6 feet.
Right.
But I've been taller than a lot of people that are 6'1", but I'm flat out like actually like legitimately 6'0". That's why everybody thinks I'm like taller than I am, just because of kind of how those numbers get treated.
Yeah, yeah. I'm 6'1", and I find that as well. I've met many people who tell me they're 6 feet, and I'm like, okay, then how am I like 3.5 inches taller than you?
Yeah,
And even in the fitness industry, I've met people who are like, no, like I'm 5'10", like because I mean, I understand when people lie and say like 5'11" to 6 foot, but I bet people who are like they're 5'8", they say they're 5'10", like, so you must be 6'3", and I'm like, well, I'm not 6'3", but
yeah, man. I would not have guessed that'd be such an issue. But then you have that what's his name? No one is safe, and the huge guy he works, the guys who go and weigh everybody at the Arnold and
oh
whatnot.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. What's that guy's name? I know you're talking about.
I know no one is safe, the red hair dude. But the other one's whatever. Great
Yeah,
guys. I mean, they were the first ones to they were the first ones to kind of bully what's his face, Big Mike, and make him back down from confrontation. That was, I mean,
what
that
happened
was
with
a
that?
real
I don't
oh,
understand.
they tried to measure they tried to get Big Mike to confirm his stats on a scale, and he and his buddy started talking real tough to them. Big Mike actually challenged no one is safe to a fist fight. He
Oh,
challenged him to step
I
outside,
did
and
see that.
this guy does.
Yes.
I mean, this guy, he does MMA, so he's like, okay, let's do it. And then, Big Mike's like, oh no, I'm not going.
Mike, the
Okay,
guy who shoved Jeff Nippert.
yeah.
Oh,
So,
yes, yes,
and I
yes.
mean, he didn't
Okay, I
even,
did see
yeah.
that.
I mean, he didn't even know that this guy did MMA. He just saw that the guy's like like 6'2" or something, and
Yeah.
well, actually, I don't really want to go outside. What do
Right,
you
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
coward?
pretty funny. Yeah, I was just actually, I'll be releasing a podcast soon. So by the time this comes out, it'll be released with Mario Tomich and Jeffrey Schofield, and just talking about how it's just super common in the industry to just lie about stats. And people can pretty easily get away with it because if you're posting on Instagram, you're posting your best pictures or your best lifts and whatnot. And so it's very easy to exaggerate, 10, 20%, and people kind of don't really think
Mm.
much about it.
Yeah, definitely. Is he now? Jeff is still claiming 6 feet, right? He
Um,
hasn't backed it off. If he gets under 6 feet, then I can do the he's a short king, so let's say he has short king's proportion scope,
oh,
and then I won't have
right.
to address the fact that he has 19 arms and charms.
Yeah,
So if he can be a little bit under 6 feet, that would be good for me.
right, right. Yeah, I think Jeff is right at 6 feet. I've never heard anything, as far as like to the
Yeah.
contrary. Why do you say that? Are you saying that he like his measurements are hard to believe, or
No, it's just it's hard. Yet you're kind of looking for a cope to deal with the fact that he has
oh,
19-inch arms.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
like I saw the other day, TNF Joel Twittenheim posted he was 5. I thought he was taller, but he posted he was 5'9". I'm like, thank God. Yeah, because
Yeah,
now I can do this. Now I can do the okay, cool. Because I was back in the day. It's like were you on 4chan Fit back in the day?
I wasn't actually. I was never on 4chan of any type.
It's probably the same as body space. Like, if you're under 6 feet, you're a manlet.
Right,
You'll never
right,
get any women or anything of that nature, but you're going to be incredibly jacked, incredibly aesthetic, and
right,
incredibly strong. And if you're above 6 feet, you can get women, but you're always going to be skinny and your lips will suck.
right,
So
right, right.
it's
Yeah,
like
sure.
you can kind of cope that way about it.
I
If
just
so, if
saw
someone's shorter than you, yeah,
Yeah, I just saw Liver King, like a video about him, and I mean, it was actually kind of sad because he's obviously pretty short. I guess he's like 5'6" or something, and he was saying that he would buy elevator shoes, but then in the elevator shoes would put like other lifts in there, and that with his car, he would raise his seat up as high as possible, and he would put the passenger seat as low as possible and actually break the mechanism so that they couldn't move it up. And I was like, man, I mean, that's some serious like issue there, unfortunately.
yeah. But that's the thing though. People who have that kind of issues are the ones who are going to be the most successful because they're the ones that need that validation. Like other people who aren't like that might want it, but they don't need it. I mean, those guys are going to be the ones that go, that kind of do the work no one else wants, or not work, but they're going to do what no one else wants to do because they have a need for it, not a want. We're seeing also, what's his face, the convict, or maybe fake what's his name? Wes Watson. He's melting down. Apparently, it's not. Apparently, he exaggerated his prison stories. He didn't actually do. I didn't know people even
I know
did
the
that. Like
name. I
he went
don't
to
really know
prison. It's
him,
not,
but
he's some orange juiced up asshole who just
oh,
yells at everybody about his
okay.
prison life. I'm surprised you haven't heard about this guy on
I've
here.
heard the
But yeah,
name.
apparently he made a name for himself because he's kind of like the white version of Cali Muscle, if you know what.
Okay. Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
basically, prisoner comes out, prison stories, bunch of steroids, but it turns out half the prison stories are made up. I didn't even realize that was a.
Oh, I
I didn't
think a
realize
lot of
people like
people who
stolen
come out
about.
as prisoners, I think a lot of that stuff is probably exaggerated of like what was done and everything. But I think it also depends on, you said they have to succeed. I guess it depends on what you consider success. I mean, Liver King is not, I mean, financially, I suppose he's successful,
Yeah,
but I mean, I think somebody's going through a divorce. He sounds mentally very fragile. I don't know if I would look at that
yeah.
person as a picture of success personally.
No, I don't mean like that's what I want for my life. It's just like as far as like doing well on social media, you
Yeah, yeah.
like that. Like those are the people that are going to do what it takes.
Need
Tim
more
Kennedy, if you know
validation,
who that
sure.
is he's kind of a laughing stock in the veteran community right now because it turns out he made up his entire book.
Oh, well.
The Green Beret who turned MMA fighter. Apparently, his whole book's made up. So it really seems like a lot of the first movers in the social media space were just like the people that were just so insecure they had to they had to
Yeah,
lie a
yeah.
bunch.
Yeah, it's very hard with
But
social
yeah,
media, I think, because I don't know. I have a friend who sends me a lot of these like other podcasts that are kind of like tangential to self-improvement and stuff. And I'm just not, I don't know. It's not super interesting to me because I just know that so much of this stuff is just nonsense and lies, and
Hmm.
it's personalities, right? It's big personalities
Yeah.
that kind of get the attention. So that's why I really value when I do find somebody who is like I've talked about this guy on the podcast before. I've had him a few times. Nick Verhoeven. He's like totally outside of anything with like that. He's like science based. Like he just got his PhD, but he talks about health and whatnot, and there's just no like nonsense shenanigans. It's not drama. It's just like quality content, and I really appreciate that. And anybody like 3DMJ guys, like they're not making videos on like the hype. And even I occasionally make some videos. You know, I think you and I talked about my video on Mike Israel and everything, and that's just I'm just doing that for fun. You know, it's just like something fun to talk about.
Hmm.
But I do appreciate the people who can garner a following with just legitimate information. But again, not that I have a inherent problem. Like obviously, I think like you make some content on influencers and Jeffrey Schofield does. Like it's fun. It's just I think that's a little bit more predictable path to growth. You know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I like that stuff, but I mean, I always try to make it. There's always a point to it. I always try to make it educational, and just combating misinformation where I see it. And I think I went after Squat U a lot, as you probably saw that until he
Yeah.
blocked me.
Okay.
There are certain targets that I've gone after a lot. I don't really talk about people that there's no point in talking about. Like everybody talks about Sam Sulek.
Mm.
I don't really know anything about him. He's just some guy who wants to be a bodybuilder. So cool,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
he can do whatever he's going to do. But when you have people out here that are misrepresenting something that I care about, I definitely like to correct the record on that. And if it's fun for people, then it's fun for people too.
Yeah, I think there's
I
a lot of
just
value in it actually. I know that some people they just want to like they're like I'm just going to stay. I mean, you should stay in your lane, but in terms of your area of expertise. But some people say, hey, like just put out the good information, and that's all that's needed. And I disagree with that. You know, I mean, I
mm,
think in many areas of life, if you have somebody that's putting out misinformation, as we were just saying, that can garner a following. Oh, it's this controversial thing. It's a controversial way to make money. It's a controversial way to improve your health, whatever. And then that gets all this attention. I think it makes sense to say, hey, this is what this person said, and this is why it's flawed. You know, I don't know if you've seen John Jaquish with like the X3 bar nonsense and everything, but he's somebody where it's like, this person is selling to millions of people on frankly, what is just completely untrue. There's like one paper supporting what he says, and it actually doesn't support what he says if you actually read the paper, and it's just fake PhD, all this stuff. And it's like, I think those people should be called out. And even like I wouldn't say I make like call out videos, but I think it can just make sense to kind of have a back and forth on what you think. Like I obviously when we'll talk about this, you with like some of the Milo Wolf stuff, it's like, hey, if you really disagree with it, then put it out there and then you
mm.
guys can have a discussion on it.
Well, I would like to, but some people, some of these discussions are pretty one sided. Some people tend to show up to these um, discussions,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, my best example for that is Joel Seedman, right? Like people want to say what you said, like don't feed the troll, don't give anyone. All you're doing is giving them engagement. Just put out the truth on your own, and don't say anyone else is saying anything wrong. It's like kindergarten. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Like all these big tough guys, tattooed tough guys on TRT and whatnot are suddenly become a bunch of kindergarten teachers when you
Yeah,
go,
right.
actually criticizing another man online. But like Joel Seaman's the example I like to give. Okay, sure, he gets tons of engagement, he's got tons of reach, like tons of following, like big name, right? But does he actually have any influence though? Do you ever see anybody outside of his little space doing Joel Seaman exercises? No, because people are watching him, but they're laughing at him. He's a clown.
Mhm.
So I think the fact that everybody else is just clowning on him all the time and talking about how dumb he is, like he's getting the reach, but people aren't. He's not influencing people. People
Mhm.
aren't doing what they see him doing because they're seeing that feedback from the fitness community that his stuff is silly. So they're treating him as entertainment. I mean, hell, I followed him for entertainment for a while. It's just funny.
Yeah.
Um, versus somebody like somebody who everyone respects, who has the same amount of reach. Then you see everyone doing it. Like not it's controversial, but I mean, Ben Patrick is a guy with a whole lot of following and reach, and you do see everybody and their mom trying his stuff. Right now, some people dislike him, a lot of people dislike him a whole lot, but you have a lot of other people that are saying, "Okay, yeah, I found value in this." So I think it's not just about reach and how big your following is. Like people are paying attention to what the feedback is. So if you, yeah, I mean, if you have someone putting out a bunch of misinformation, but all the feedback is negative, that's not going to influence people. So
Sure.
I think it's important to put out that negativity, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. So let's circle back a little to some of your content. And again, just full disclosure, I've only seen limited content. So I actually thought it would be nice. Like I watched the video that you did with Alex Leonidas, and I actually almost cut myself off from more because I was like, you know what, let me get just like, a straight on conversation about it. Because sometimes I think if you get too much information, then you get an opinion before maybe like talking to the person and everything. So I'm going in with limited information here, but I know that you've made some general content on the quote unquote evidence-based fitness industry and whatnot. Again, I know you've had some specific like posts and everything on Milo. So what do you think is your biggest criticism? You could either make it specific to what like Milo Wolf is putting out, or maybe just in general, but some of the content you put out.
Okay, so my let's we'll start we'll start big in general and then get specific. So my issue with the evidence based like philosophy, I guess. I hate saying philosophy; it sounds really like wishy washy. But my issue with being like evidence based in fitness is just that the evidence in a lot of cases, in my opinion, really sucks. My background for claiming that I was in experimental psychology in a master's program for a while, everything but thesis, before I kind of realized that that was a kind of a waste of my time, and took my life in a completely different direction. But in the process, I got a bunch of training in actual research methods, statistics, running experiments, all that good stuff. And I mean, every time I crack one of these studies, it's like they're failing to adhere to kind of the basic standards that another scientific field would actually adhere to. Like you're seeing studies with 11 subjects or something ridiculous like that. They're not double blinding the studies. It's apparently acceptable for someone to just say, "Oh yeah, no, we didn't double blind. Just trust me, bro. I wouldn't like." You have like a repeated measures test where you're putting the same group of people through two different conditions, and that's your how you're setting up the variable, and then you're not controlling for order effects. And all this is just kind of really basic stuff that you would just not be able to get published in I think any other field.
Yeah.
And this is actually getting published and treated as normal. And the excuse is just like, oh well, it's hard to get resources, so that's all we have. But okay, it's like you don't have the if you don't have the resources to do what you're trying to do, then I guess you don't get to do it, right? That would be my take. Like this stuff isn't designed such that you can necessarily trust the results you're getting, with what you're doing, right? Like now, I'm not trying to like say psychology is this big wonderful thing, and a lot of
Mhm.
like psychology has its issues. I was in my program at the time that the replication crisis hit.
Yeah.
That's probably has a lot to do with my cynicism. That was when
Right.
for those who haven't heard about that, this fellow named Daryl Bim, a big shot in social psychology, I'd seen him in undergrad and in the textbooks, published a study on extrasensory perception. He's literally trying to publish data saying that people could predict the future, like literally. I'm not even making this up or like exaggerating or trying to be a contrarian. This is what happened, and he got it published in one of the most prestigious journals in that field, just based kind of on the power of his name because he was a big shot, right? And so a lot of people saw that and they're like, okay, this is a problem. Like, how did we get here? So we ended up trying to replicate a bunch of the studies in that field because like the propaganda on science that normies are sold is that, well, all these scientists are out here replicating each other's results, and if anything doesn't hold up, well, other people are going to be fact checking that doesn't happen because there's no incentive for it. You have these people out here who are desperately trying to get a bunch of new findings published in prestigious journals so that they don't get fired after 7 years, because if you don't get enough journals or enough publications in prestigious journals, you don't get tenure. And what that means is you worked at your job for 7 years and now you're fired and you can't work. And not only are you fired from that job, you're probably going to have a hard time working in your chosen field ever again. And bottom line, there's no incentive for actually trying to replicate other people's research. You're trying to find your own novel findings. Bottom line, we found that a lot of stuff didn't replicate. And I totally understand why. I think in a lot of cases, people are just making up their data because they have to do that to just not to get fired, right? Um, But at least on paper, they make everything look good, even if they completely fabricated their data set because it's what they had to do so that they could provide for their families. They at least made it look good on paper. But then you look at exercise science, and it's like, and in a lot of cases, it's like, come on, you're not meeting the bare minimum standards that you would need to meet to actually get published in another field. This is why are we even using this? So
Right.
that's kind of my general. And that's not to say every study is that bad, but if you look at if you look at the list of actual good studies, it's not going to answer that many questions in fitness. And you still have issues of like generalizability, like does this finding that we have, in a bunch of untrained people, and they always try to do shady stuff where they'll talk about like trained individuals, but then you find out the average bench press is like 165 pounds or
Yeah.
something. Does this apply to advanced lifters? Does this apply here? It's just you don't get a lot of actual answers for
Yeah,
a lot
it's
of
definitely
questions.
tough. I mean, and to be fair to exercise science, I mean, for one, it obviously is impossible to double blind some of these studies, right? I mean, you can't have like a high volume and a low volume group and be like, hey, you're actually doing 50 sets if
Yeah,
you're doing five. So that, there's limitations there. And then of course, most of it's on college students. And I've helped run a couple of studies, and the my takeaway, unfortunately, was just like, wow, like this is not a now again, we're talking like two studies, but this is not a population that I would say, wow, like this is really going to apply to most people.
mm-hmm.
Obviously, small sample size. It's tough. I mean, I don't think that the studies shouldn't be run, but I would rather a collaboration be made and say, hey, let's all get together and get like, one large group over, and maybe in the case of college, 2 semesters long rather than like an 8 week study or something. It is tough. And I do think that sometimes too much weight is put on the studies for sure. I think it can give general recommendations, and also to be fair, I think the true purveyors of science, the true like again like the Dr. Eric Helms and Eric Trexler's, the people who are less sensationalistic, I think they would say that same thing. They would say, hey, look, this is just giving us a general guide, but at the end of the day, you need to use your anecdote, your own personal anecdote and experience and everything. I think it's more the people who are less actual, that people maybe don't have the doctorates or just looking for maybe social media clout, and then take a study and say, this is going to change everything we know about training. I don't see that sensationalism from like the true educators generally.
Yeah, I would definitely tend to agree with that. I mean, I'll be honest, I still don't find that much interest in all that. I just feel like I'm probably going to get more from anecdotal sources. I'd much rather just go to the guy who he's either bigger but not taking steroids, obviously, because that obviously is a complaining factor. But the guy who's very successful at what he's doing, or specifically the guy who is very successful at coaching others, to achieve that end. Like that's where I tend to rather go, or just
Mhm.
personal experimentation. But yeah, you'll notice I never criticize the people that don't do the sensationalism and don't misrepresent findings and all that nonsense. Like you won't find their names mentioned in a negative light on my page.
Yeah.
You mostly find the people like, yeah, I mean, Milo Wolf, Mike Israetel, Minnow, Hanselman's. Good God, that guy's. And I mean, these guys. It's like you don't even have to get into a critique of science with these guys. You just have to say, okay, what you're posting on Instagram is not even what that study said. That's not, this is not even an accurate representation of the study. Whether or not the study that we're referencing has merit or not, okay, you got to at least represent it in a way that is somewhat responsible, right?
Yeah,
And
sure.
that's kind of that's a fairly low standard, but they routinely fail to clear that bar. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's usually who I take issue with.
I had a buddy who's done a lot of research, and he was published on the cover of Nature, and is in neuroscience. And he always just talks smack on the entire like fitness industry as far as how they do science. And he's like a big fitness bro, but as far as the actual science that comes out of the fitness industry, he's very critical of it. I've had all the guys you mentioned on the podcast, and so I don't these days I don't consume a ton of new content. I don't want to say I don't consume content, but like a lot of it's just stuff that's sent to me. So I'll have to reserve judgment only in the sense that I'm not seeing everything that's posted by, let's say, Menno or Dr. Mike or anything like that. So I believe that that stuff probably happens. It's just, but I'm not like completely up to date on that. So what I do find interesting is this kind of dichotomy between either it's like got to be science or look at like what somebody looks like, and you obviously have the different camps. You mentioned you try to go by more of like your personal experience and people who are big. I noticed in one or two of the videos I saw of yours, and a lot of the comments were a lot about how the people looked. Saying like, oh, like Milo has impressive legs, for example, but not impressive upper body. So why am I going to listen to him on arms? And I guess this will kind of get into our next discussion a little bit about like, genetic influence and whatnot and weak body parts. But I just find that line of thinking very interesting, especially when it's within the same person. So like, and again, I'm not saying you said this, but like in some of the comments, they were like, why would I take advice from this person being Milo when his arms aren't impressive, right? Why am I going to take bicep growth advice? And implying that they would take, let's say, quad tips from him, which to me is kind of shocking because if it's like, okay, yes, his legs are more impressive than his upper body, but do you think that this person has this grand knowledge on how to train his quads and that's why they're more impressive and he is completely lacking in knowledge on how to train biceps? Like I could see, I don't agree with this, but I could see how somebody could say, oh, this person is generally more impressive than this person. So I'm going to listen to that person. Again, I don't agree with it, but I can understand it. But when you're looking within the same person, it's like very clear to me that like obviously people have strong and weak body parts. It doesn't mean that Jeffrey Schofield is like the guy to listen to for hamstrings, but not for pecs. Like, or sorry, on triceps, not hamstrings. It's not like Jeffrey Schofield is the guy to listen to for triceps, but he has no knowledge on pecs just because that's kind of what's grown. So what do you think of that?
I think there's still something. If someone, we can get pretty specific with it. I mean, if someone has been successful in one very specific area, I think they might have more to share on it than an area that they have not been successful in. Like, for example, if you were trying to get advice on bodybuilding from me, let's say, 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't have had much useful to say about any area, except one area I could probably get you pretty squared away in is traps. I managed to develop my traps very well. That was one of the first things that I found kind of a little hack for that would work very well. And I stand by the same advice today. To this day, there's a bunch of other stuff that I would now give you a lot better advice, and I'm also much better developed there. Not to say like, I mean, I'm sure some people could just have random good body parts by accident. Obviously, a lot of people just randomly get calves for no apparent reason. They don't even train them.
Yeah, sure.
So that it doesn't necessarily mean that, some guy, that anyone who has um, one good body part can necessarily give you good advice on how to train that. But in most cases, you don't see naturals develop too many, really strong body parts of, calves in that one. That's kind of the weird one, right? Calves without having at least something, worthwhile to contribute. I mean, even yeah, so I definitely think um, you might be successful in one body part and fail in others, and that I think is indicative of your knowledge. That being said, I would say don't follow Milo's quad advice because I think a lot of people will hurt their knees doing that. But
So do you think, I mean, again, I'm sure, Milo is a competitive bodybuilder, and I'm not here to like defend Milo at all. I'm just more just, he's a good example here. So Milo is a competitive bodybuilder, right? I'm sure that he's well aware that his lower body is much more impressive than his upper body, right? Don't you think that given that that's always been the case, if you look at his progress throughout the years, that it's probably not due to better training for his quads. It's probably due to a stronger genetic response to his training. I mean, we see this all the time, right? Like my cousin, literally his legs are probably about 3 inches bigger than mine. He does not train them. He's just a big, like farm boy. He used to train like 2 years, 20 years old. He's literally got like 28-inch quads. That is purely genetic in his case. And his upper body, I mean, he's maybe got like 14-inch arms. I don't think that that would mean that he is better equipped to give quad advice, right? Despite that. And obviously you see the opposite plenty of times. People with kind of chicken legs. Oftentimes that is just not adequately training them, right? I think you do see that quite a bit. But at least in my experience, I would say that I've seen most people tend to grow proportionally, and a lot of that is just some people have weaker and stronger body parts. Not that now to your point, I think if somebody had a weak body part, and let's say they were that weak body part was a relative weak body part from years 1 through 7, and then they changed something, they changed something, they changed something else, and then that weak body part became a stronger body part, then I think that's a really good person to listen to because they have changed that. So Alex Leonidas is a great example, right? Arms were pretty average. How was he training? Kind of power building, not really focusing on it. Changed some things up, and then he went from pretty average to pretty like solid arms. That is somebody who I'd say you actually had to change. But I think most people they don't really have like something that goes from super weak to super big.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't. So the genetics thing is going to be. I mean, we're going to have a whole
Oh
conversation
yeah,
on that
yeah,
because I
no,
don't like referring to genetics nearly as much.
sure.
If I see a lagging, I mean, my thought when I see some people that are a little bit more successful in some areas than others, not that I think he's got like Tom Platz quads or anything, but I mean, I guess proportionally maybe a little bit. I tend, especially with that click, I tend to think that we have these like grand unifying theories about how everything needs to be trained, and we're trying to train everything, kind of the same way, and that approach doesn't always work as well on every single muscle. Like for example, I mentioned where a time when I had basically one strong body part, and that was the one body part where just lifting a ton of weight and being a meathead ego lifter actually worked.
Yeah.
So like everything else not measuring up to that was representative of my approach, and it worked well for one thing, it didn't work for anything else. So to like change that, I had to learn a lot more, in some cases more refined approach with mind muscle control, in a lot of cases just more diverse exercise, but I had to learn different approaches for different areas. So I tend to suspect that when you see that, especially in these, I mean, especially in people that are more, that I guess you would say are science based. Not that I'm saying they're doing exactly what science says, but they just have that like, I'm going to use this. I have this kind of grand unifying theory about how things should be trained. I'm going to use that approach to train everything. It's probably going to work a lot better in some areas than others. Like, let's talk about I mean, Milo's thing is the length and partial, the stretch. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely going to work very well in quads. It's going to work super well in hamstrings. If you try to only train your arms in that position, I'm not sure how well that's going to work. Not too many people that I'm aware of with big arms focus exclusively on just you know the incline curls, and especially the flat incline curl. I actually like that movement, but it's not.
Mhm.
It's certainly not going to be all that you're going to want to do. You're going to want to do some heavier, more mid-range movements as well, and maybe push the intensity on those a little bit more. That's what people tend to do that actually tend to be successful with arms. Not to say the stretch isn't important there too, but it's not all you do. Um, and I do think that just from my personal experience, I would say probably that stretch approach is going to work a lot better for hamstrings certainly than it would for arms in most cases. Um, so I wouldn't. It's not at all shocking to me that kind of a one size fits all approach hasn't yeah,
Well, I don't think
worked
he's. I think he's
as well in
only.
other areas.
Yeah, I think he's only been doing the length and partial stuff for the last year or two in terms of like obviously he's been training much longer and I think he's followed more traditional training. Also, I just want to add here, we'll talk about the genetics and everything. I think just in general, especially as a guest on a podcast, it's just going to be a inclination towards obviously we want to be polite and whatnot, of course, but feel free to push back on anything I say. Like I just, I'm more than happy to have like a back and forth here, so we don't have to agree on everything. So I'm sure we will have some disagreements on some of the genetic stuff. So, and for the audience, this is more just I think a fun conversation. So it's certainly nothing like negative between us.
Okay, yeah, cool. You want to just knock out the genetics thing now so that we have that kind
Sure.
of hashed out before we get into anything else? Because
Yeah, yeah, sure.
okay, so I think we probably have some disagreement on that. I don't like talking about genetics as much as a lot of people do in the fitness industry. Not because I don't think it's a real thing. Obviously, it's a real thing. It does have an impact, but the problem is like we're never actually directly assessing it. I mean, the way we talk about it, it's almost like I feel like people in medieval eras would like talk about witchcraft or magic or something. It's just like this intangible thing that you can use to explain anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's kind of like we kind of just talk about genetics for everything, and no one really fact checks it. But the reality is, we're talking about a real thing. We're talking about someone's DNA. This like it actually is a real physical thing. We're not going and getting swabbing our cheeks and going to get our DNA analyzed or anything. We're not going to geneticists. We're just all kind of like, if you want to talk about your own genetics, it's kind of a pick your own adventure. You can just, if you want to be the guy who says, well, I had bad genetics, but I just worked so hard, I beat my genetics and I was successful anyway. Or on the other hand, you can be like, Greg Doucette, and just talk about how amazing your genetics are. If you want to be that special guy who just has the
Yeah,
really
yeah,
good
right,
genetics, you can. Or
right.
I don't know. No one says this. No one wants to say, oh, well, you know what, I have normal genetics, whatever that means. But you can kind of pick your own adventure, and no one
I would
fact
say I
checks
have
it.
pretty
Like,
normal genetics, but yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the same person could, depending on what they, which angle they want to go with it, they could pick either one, whichever one they feel is going to be sound cool, or
Yeah.
no one's going to fact check it. Or then, then you talk about some other person. Oh, well, that guy just has good genetics, or that guy has bad genetics, or whatever the case may be. And it's just, I think it's always going to be a problem when you have this thing that everyone just talks about, and like there's just kind of the expectation that it's never actually going to be objectively verified. If no one's ever going to conclusively say, I caught you lying, you're wrong, you should feel bad. Like, at least with steroids, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
there's always the, oh, is this guy on, is this guy not, how can you tell? You can totally tell. But like, there is at least the possibility that something like with Liver King will happen, where somebody actually comes with receipts and says, no, this guy was taking steroids and here's the proof. But with
Right,
genetics,
right.
that's never going to happen. Like, Coach Gray can talk about how this guy has, good or bad genetics all he wants, and no one ever is going to come, ha, I caught Coach Greg lying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
His genetics actually aren't that. I did a DNA
Right.
test, right? So it's just like this made up thing that we can just like say whatever we want about. So I think we should be a lot more careful and just understand that we're kind of just making up whatever story we want to tell. I'm not saying like genetics don't matter. Obviously, we know that they do, but I mean, this stuff it is on a normal distribution, which means it is going to cluster a lot towards the mean in every characteristic. It's not. I
How do
think
you
people
know
don't
it's on a
realize
normal
how.
distribution?
Oh, I mean, I'm assuming most characteristics are. It's going to depend on like what characteristic we're talking about, like limb lengths, stuff like that. That's probably going to be fairly normalized. I would assume. Uh, I guess that kind of depends. I guess like stuff like insertions and all that may not necessarily be normally distributed or whatever. Like when you're talking about like good bodybuilding genetics, just the aesthetic, I don't know if that's normally distributed, but I'm assuming like muscle size, response to training, all that stuff is probably going to be on that continuum. You're probably not going to see a whole lot of bizarre outliers.
So
But I
I
think
agree.
people.
I think it probably is normally distributed, and when I talk about it, I make the assumption that it is. I'm asking because you're speaking as if it's such an undefinable trait. So I think if we're going to assume it's on a normal distribution, I think we can probably for this context talk about muscle hypertrophy potential, right? Because obviously bodybuilding does involve limb lengths and aesthetics, and there's a lot more to it. But if we want, for the sake of conversation, we can just talk about muscle hypertrophy because that is a little bit more tangible.
Okay, yeah, and that's where it gets confusing too, because like you can talk about genetics being very important in bodybuilding, and they are, but what that means is that if you get let's say 10 5'8", 260-pound mass monsters on stage, genetics are going to determine who ends up being Mr. Olympia, because one of them is going to look way better at 5'8", 260 than the others, right?
Yeah.
So it's supremely important in essentially what is essentially, I hate to say it, a beauty pageant.
Yeah.
Which one of you's prettiest, and genetics are going to completely play the role. Like you can bulk like 10 guys up to the same proportions, but they're not all going to look as good, right? So
Sure.
genetics is supremely important. But then I think people take that and make the jump to, okay, well, that means that some people can gain just vastly more muscle than others. And I don't think that's as true as people think it is. I'm not saying that some people don't have a better response than others, but I don't think you have the kind of variation that people are thinking it is. That is probably going to be a lot more normally distributed. You're probably not going to have like massive outliers, and I think the odds of those massive outliers are a lot lower than people think. Like I forget the exact figure. I don't have it set up. I don't have it queued up, but I recall remembering like the number of actual 7 foot tall human beings on the planet is actually like surprisingly low for like we have what, like 7 billion now, or is it up to 8? And it's
Yeah, close.
I think
Yeah.
it's in the thousands. I think less than I think it's in the multiple thousands, but not even 10,000. I think so. The odds of outliers on a single variable are very low, but then when you get into like multivariate outliers, that's multiplicative. So if you're trying to explain like some guy, oh, this guy just has really good genetics, and well, why is he trained in an opposite way from what we would think would be good for a natural for like we're trying to explain like somebody who's being accused of being a fake nat.
Sure.
Oh, well, he has really good genetics. Well, why doesn't he train like successful naturals do? Oh, well, he's a genetic outlier, so he probably needs to train differently. Okay, so your odds of being both genetically gifted in terms of how much muscle you can put on, but then at the same time, unless we have some reason to think those variables like covary, which I wouldn't think there would be, like now this guy's a multivariate outlier. People don't have no idea how like low the odds of that actually being the case
Sure.
are. Whereas something like trend is not on that normal distribution. Like or
Right.
taking drugs, there are all sorts of like drugs that humans just do not have in our systems normally. So you can get you can get a crazy response to that, or training if somebody actually is natural and he's being accused of steroids incorrectly. Maybe he's had a vastly greater exposure to training than other people, or maybe he's trained differently. So I think there are a lot of variables that are not necessarily going to cluster so closely to the mean, like steroids and training, as I think genetics are. Which isn't to
Yeah.
say there couldn't be outliers, but I just don't think it should be our go-to to explain everything. You know what I mean?
Sure. I mean, I think if you're looking at like a general population of people who like in a given gym and everything, then you're probably not going to see too many of the freaks. Just to back up a little bit in terms of, because one of your comments in our DMs was something along the lines of, I said something like, yeah, I think I have probably average to above average genetics for strength and pretty average genetics from like a bodybuilding standpoint. And you said, well, I don't know because I've never had my genetics tested. And actually, well, I technically have had mine tested because I've done the whole 23andMe thing, but certainly not for specific to hypertrophy. We don't really have that data. So, but and I get like that's kind of just like a cheeky comment, but the reality is, of course, we know that there's a huge genetic influence on a lot of things. But before we even had genetic testing, right? I think we know that there's a genetic influence on height. That's a very obvious one, right? Despite it being fairly controversial, there's a significant correlation between like genetics and IQ, for example. We can look at twin studies.
Hey, I'm not trying to get canceled here. Let's not mention. I'm not associated. I don't. I'm not
um,
associated with that. I'm not trying to get canceled.
yeah. So, in terms of like twin studies are a really great model for things like this, right? And like adoption studies and whatnot can be very helpful. So we obviously know that there's genetic influence on a lot of factors. I think what does become very difficult with understanding the influence when it comes to, let's say, muscle hypertrophy is that you have both a training effect and a genetic effect, right? So there are some things where it is almost completely genetic, right? So again, height can certainly be influenced by other things like nutritional status and whatnot, but it is very strongly determined by genetics. Whereas you might have something else that is almost, I don't want to say not determined by genetics at all, but there's such a huge environmental aspect to it that again, that is more clear. When you have something like muscle mass, I believe that it is certainly hugely determined by both. And so, how do you know if that person who's impressive is 2 years into training with moderate effort, but just has like Phil Heath level genetics, or that they actually have fairly average genetics, quote unquote, average genetics, but have been training for 20 years in the best way possible? And you don't, right? Unless you know that person, you don't. And so, it can be very hard. I think the reason it can be brought up a lot on social media is because social media, kind of going back to our earlier discussion, it gives credence to like the standout people, right? Whether that's a personality or whether that's, a physique or, a girl who's extremely attractive, whatever that is, those are the people who become popular. I guarantee that if, and Jeffrey Schofield has said, he probably thinks, 85th percentile, 90th percentile genetics. Obviously, it was way too specific to know for sure, but he's obviously had a very good response to lifting, right? If, and again, I think we agree there's probably a bell curve distribution. If Jeffrey Schofield was the exact same guy and trained in the exact same way, whatever, but he had a 20th percentile response, nobody would know him. And so the fact that people who get good responses are those who then gain a following, then makes it so that those who are outliers are the ones who become more popular. So it is accurate to say that, oh, all of these people have great genetics because that is why they have become popular. Or again, they have something really unique about them. Or of course, there's the steroids. I'm going to assume the lack of steroids for this sake of conversation. So we're just talking about like naturals here. So that makes it very difficult, right? And then you have some people who have just really stuck around for a long time. Maybe it's their knowledge that puts them in the top tier. You know, you do have some people who they have big followings based on knowledge and whatnot. So I think that when you're looking at 7, 8 billion people, those are those people who are going to have a big response, and those are the people who are going to become well known. To your point, I don't think that it's actually something that most people should focus on. If we, it's funny because I know that it's become like a pet topic of mine, and I bring it up quite often. I would love to never bring it up. I would love if people just, if it was like, let's just say it was just a known thing, right? Hey, this guy drives a Lamborghini. This guy drives a Toyota Corolla. We understand that there's a significant aspect to their 0 to 60 time that's not just based on driving skill, or their lap time that's not just based on driving skill. You don't even have to have that conversation because it's so blatantly obvious. And then we can talk about like, well, hey, but I do just have a Toyota Corolla. That's fine. How can I still get the best lap time? And again, it's just such an obvious thing. I think if you look at, I don't know if you know him, Brian Whitaker. He's like older school natural bodybuilder. I mean, he's probably like 40, but he was a very well known natural bodybuilder. Super impressive guy, top tier. Competed though at like 150, 155. Then you got somebody like Doug Miller. You probably heard of Doug Miller. You know, called out as like one of the biggest like fake natty things. But a lot of people who I respect say he's natural. So I'm going to assume again he's natural. Or Lane Norton, whatever. They're all similar height. Lane and Doug Miller compete at about 30 plus pounds heavier than Brian Whitaker, who again is a top natural based on conditioning and shape, all these things. I think we all know that that 30 pounds is not due to training differences, right? They've all been training for like 25 years. That's genetic. And those are both pro natural bodybuilders. And like anybody who we respect mutually, like the 3D guys, they would that's like and say Brian Whitaker, super impressive guy. So if it was just kind of known, then it's like, yeah, we don't have to talk about it anymore because it's a known thing. Yep, we're all just going to focus on how we can, you know, provide the best progress for ourselves. It's more when you get the people who say, like you were saying, these people who are either martyrs and say, oh, I have terrible genetics, but look at what I've been able to do. You know, Ben Pekulski, top 6 Mr. Olympia. I have terrible genetics. It's like maybe you don't have Phil Heath's genetics, but if you're a top 6 Mr. Olympia, in addition to blasting tons of gear, you have amazing genetics, right? And so I think that is why it can be frustrating when people don't acknowledge it. And lastly, I'll just say that I think the audience is really important. So if I were to have a seminar at a local gym or a local like soccer moms club on like how to get in shape, I would even mention genetics because it's so irrelevant to them that it's like it's not what they should focus on at all. I don't think it's what 99% of people should focus on. But you know, we're in the quote unquote fitness industry, and we are talking to people who maybe say, oh, is it worth it for me to compete? Is it worth it for me to like take steroids? Is it worth it for me to, you know, whatever? Then I think it's important to understand, hey, you know what? Like the difference between this person, you know, even on the same team. I don't know if you know Revive Stronger, but like Steve Hall, Pascal Floor, both great guys, hugely different physiques. 3DMJ, Jeff Alberts versus Brad Loomis, hugely different physiques. That's when I think there's a significant genetic influence when we're looking at people who have both dedicated a huge portion of their lives to it. They're both following similar training. They both really dived into it as much as they can, but dramatically different results. So that's where I say it really matters.
I mean, in theory, you know, if everything else were controlled for 100%, then obviously it would be genetics that were the factor. It's just really messy, I think, to control for it with training because I mean, how do you confirm that each person is actually training, you know, equally hard? I mean, how do you confirm that, you know, maybe these people are doing the same training, but maybe no, not everyone needs to train exactly the same. Maybe one of these people just happen to kind of get lucky, and that happens to be I'm not saying get lucky, but like someone falls into a style that is not a style, but like, you know, you stumble upon methods that work better for you than someone else does the exact same methods. They don't work as well. Not everyone's going to need the exact same training. So perhaps this person, even though they're doing the same training, this person happened to find, methods that, work really well for them. It doesn't work for the other guy. The other guy really actually needs something different, but he just didn't happen to find that. And there is always the possibility of steroids. You're giving these guys the benefit of the doubt, and that's fine, but it is something there. I guess my closing thought, I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm just saying it's like the best analogy I have is okay, so all results in bodybuilding are ultimately going to be determined by subatomic particles interacting, amongst themselves in your body, right? This is everything in science ultimately reduces down to physics. So all this stuff can be, described in terms of physical laws, right? It's not necessarily that useful to us at our level because it's not something we can directly observe. So I'd rather keep the talk about things that we can speculate all day, but we can't actually. I don't think my understanding is you can't even really. I mean, you probably get like an idea if you went to you can probably get some idea if you went to a geneticist about kind of where you fall, but I don't think I certainly don't think we can give an accurate like full summary of okay, this is your genetics for bodybuilding based on a DNA test. But I think it's just generally better to avoid speculating on that too much and just understand that there are a lot of other variables that could be coming into play, and try not to talk about things we can't actually observe too much just because there is that tendency to just kind of tell stories and just make stuff up, and we know we're not going to be objectively fact checked on it. And honestly, like if people want to talk about their genetics or somebody else's, I'd rather they at least like do what they can, like at least go get a DNA test. And even if you're not going to get the full picture, but hey, I got my DNA tested. It says this indicates I might have good genetics. Like, if you really, 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 really want to talk about it, just go get a DNA test and at least show me you're doing your due diligence, your best within the state of science as it is today to
Well, I don't think there's
actually
really
just
anything
confirm whether you're telling
relevant.
the truth or not.
Yeah, I don't.
I
I don't know if there's any current genetic test that would be relevant for that. I mean, there's one marker that I mean, you'd really you couldn't get that with a 23andMe or anything like that. I mean, you would really have to go to like a university and try to find something. But I don't think there's really too much in that. There is actually a program called Prometheus. You can run your 23andMe data through, and they literally break down like every gene and correlation there. But it'd be like saying like, what's my genetics for cancer? It's like, well, there exists, but there's also like 1,000 alleles here that
yeah.
could be relevant. And I agree. I think it'll be a very negative thing for anybody, good or bad genetics, to focus on it so much because again, like what you can't change it as of now. The only reason I bring it up is when you get a lot of this nonsense of people who deny the influence on it and therefore skew their advice. And again, calves is like a great one. Like I specifically remember it was the weirdest thing. I was on a forum. This guy had like just like naturally like 19-inch calves and maybe even more. And he was giving all this advice. And I was just saying, like, this is hugely genetic that you have this. Like, you literally have said that you grew up with this. And then somebody was defending him who had incredibly small calves and was like in his 50s. Like he had been a bodybuilder his whole life, successful bodybuilder, but like I'm talking like 13-inch calves, just like a weird situation. And he was like defending this person saying, oh, but he could teach us. I'm like, bro, but like you're proving my point that like you've done everything this guy's doing. It's just not working. So, and again, like you get certainly not to the extent of steroids, because that's like, you really get people who are selling nonsense who are taking steroids. But you do get some people who they have a really good genetic response and people take their advice because they look a certain way. And you and I can both point to plenty of people in the industry who maybe we think are natural, who do not necessarily put out great advice despite looking great. And I mean, I can think of a lot of bozos I've met in my life who just looked really good. And I think it would be wrong to take that person's advice versus, again, maybe somebody who is really knowledgeable but doesn't have the best physique. I think they can have really great advice. So that is my thing. It's not that the individual should focus on their genetics so much. It's that I think you have to be careful who you take advice from, because you absolutely see people on both sides of the spectrum. People who are decent physique, but very knowledgeable. People who have, and maybe to your point earlier, have coached people. I've seen people who had very average physiques for a natural bodybuilder, still impressive among general population, but average natural bodybuilders who've coached people to top pro levels. And that's probably the most significant. If you've coached and used that knowledge to take people to like extremes, but they've kind of demonstrated that, hey, maybe I wasn't the best person in terms of being able to, the classic, hey, they weren't able to be a professional athlete, but they were able to coach really well because they had the knowledge.
I, so I would push back on that a little bit. In terms of just looking really good, having a good physique in terms of looking really good, just looking really pretty, everything just looks wonderful. That doesn't necessarily mean that's not necessarily going to convey any value. So somebody who just happens to look great, they may not have that much value to share. But I can't think of too many examples of someone who just has a lot of development in a certain area, who I believe is natural, who just has really, a standout, not necessarily in terms of aesthetics, but just they've just developed their, certain area to a particularly good size, and they don't have some fairly good, training knowledge to share. I mean, I can't really think of an example where I would say, okay, this guy has a really standout body part and his advice sucks. The closest thing I would actually come to that is Steve Reeves, the silver era bodybuilder. He actually had a bunch of bad advice, and got by on genetics a lot. He subscribed to the belief that you shouldn't train your obliques because that's going to make your waist look wide. You
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't train your traps because it's going to make your shoulders look narrower, and all that nonsense. And
Yeah.
as a result, at the end of the day, he just had insanely wide shoulders, which I will completely agree is 100% genetic. Tiny waist, wide shoulders. That's 100% genetic, and he was just benefiting from that. If he trained his traps and trained his obliques, he would have looked probably even better, to be honest with you. So that's bad advice from someone who looks really good genetically. But as far as people that just have really good muscular development in any area, with the exception of calves, which I'll grant you, I can't think of too many like people that I actually believe are natural who have really good development. And that I would say, okay, their advice on how to develop that is trash. I'm not. I don't have any examples that come to my mind.
Yeah, I guess obviously, it would depend on do we even agree on like what good development is, right? Like maybe we have different pictures. Like I would agree that there's a certain level where it's like, man, like if you're that developed, at least for your own self, you must have had pretty good knowledge on how to develop this. I can actually think of two in particular. One guy, man, he was just such a freak in high school, like just like crazy genetics and just such a crazy response. Another guy, actually a successful powerlifter who like basically every power lifter, he would go on these forums. I knew him personally, but I mean, like 675 for three deadlift in college, like 220. I mean, just absolute beast, and just trained like, I mean, I could probably show you videos of him training, and it's just like, what is happening here? I mean, I don't want to like, call the guy out. He's a nice guy, but I mean, just floundering, like kipping pull-ups. Everybody, like power lifter who knew him was like, dude, you have all this potential, and you're just throwing it away. He kept getting injured, but he was just a total phenom. Now, again, that's very rare. I mean, that is not a common thing. So I'm not saying like that's a normal thing, but I'm just saying I can think of examples.
I mean, yeah, I can't. Like, a lot of people would probably say that that's me because a lot of people hate my advice on training traps. I have really good traps. People hate my trap training advice. Okay, so you can take that or leave it. Maybe you want to say I have good genetics. That's actually where my dad's actually pretty jacked, but that's the one area he's lacking because he's always been a
Mm,
bodyweight beast. Just does a bunch of pull ups, dips, stuff like that. So no traps to speak of because he
mm.
has never trained them. Okay, so you can say, okay, this guy trains in a dumb way. He just has good genetics. But then if you look at the community, like pretty much everybody else who's experience based has my back on it. You've got basement bodybuilding, obviously. Got Steve Shaw. You've got obviously uh, Alex Leonidas. Obviously,
Mm.
you've got pretty much everybody else is in agreement. So even though what I'm doing looks like bad advice, I mean, pretty much everybody is saying who's not like of the oh, you have to use like mind muscle connection with like whatever
Yeah.
school of thought will say no, that works, and they all have good traps. So there's a way to assess that. And I haven't run. I mean, maybe I'm sure you'll run into some people in person that are just randomly weirdly developed.
Yeah.
Like I actually have a client who is just like he has the most insane legs that I've ever seen. Like if you just look at his legs purely, you would not believe he's natural. You would call him a fake natty, but then you look at his upper body and it's like, okay, yeah, he's natty, but he's just yeah, he's just that jack. And yeah, maybe I mean, he's actually very athletic, but
What does he do for his
yeah,
legs?
maybe he wouldn't have the. I mean, he has a good athletic background. He played rugby. So he's done lifting and all. He's a strong guy, but I think he'd give good advice. But it wouldn't be like the best advice in the world. So there's probably a genetic component there. I would definitely say, but especially as far as people that I'm thinking about on social media, that are actually out on social media giving advice. I can't think of anybody who just has one standout body part who I think is natural that I would say like their advice is seems to be bad or it's not in keeping with
So this client of yours,
the
how
rest
long
of the
has he been
community.
training?
He's I mean, I think off and on for a long time,
Okay.
like over a decade.
So do you think he would have great advice for training legs that would be far superior to his knowledge for training upper body?
I feel like he would do a better job of explaining legs. Yes, but so yeah, I kind of made your point for you. I did find an example there, but yeah, that he's definitely an exception to the rule. But I mean, he hasn't been that serious about training until recently, so
Including his
that's
legs.
kind of where that is. He just kind of got whatever like kind of whatever he got and wasn't that serious about the upper. He doesn't like training upper body as much, which is weird.
Yeah.
but but
So,
anyway, yeah.
and just last question I had on this before because I do want to get into some of your actual training because there's a few things I found very interesting and actually one in particular I just started implementing. I'm just wondering where is the level that you take it? Is it to an extreme? Like so, for example, I think you said in your podcast with Alex Leonidas, you had mentioned that I think it was your overhead press that you said you could not overhead press 200 pounds at 200 pounds body weight, and you got it up to about 230 at 230 pounds body weight. Was that accurate?
Yeah.
And how long roughly did you try to get your overhead press up?
Um. So honestly, I done it a lot. But I've been doing it. I think I've been doing it for 4 years. Um. Kind of off and on. I wasn't that serious about it. Got more serious towards the end of that. But still didn't really budge a lot, honestly, until I went on an insane bulk,
Hmm.
and that's when I just got a huge amount of progress in.
Yeah.
I mean, part of that was just getting. I think the technique finally clicked for me, and I got some things. I got the technique kind of click for me, but then yeah, fairly quickly over the course of one insane bulk where I was doing the GOMAD and just all the insanity, all the like really bad dirty bulk. Yeah, it just shot up, and yeah, I was able to get a very strict clean and press with 230. I tried to make it a military press, which is an old school lift. Everyone talks about military press that. But the reality is, a military press is a press in the position of attention. Like your heels are together, you're not moving an inch. I probably leaned back a little bit more than you're allowed to, but it was definitely a very strict press
Yeah.
at 230. And then when I cut down to lighter body weights again, I lost more overhead press than I did body weight, which is silly. But
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that is interesting.
yeah, it's it's that's very demoralizing, honestly.
Sure.
Yeah, it's but
The
yeah,
overhead
it's
press is definitely one that I found obviously like the practice effect is very significant. And I would say, and this is kind of goes in line with me saying before that I think my genetics for strength are better than my genetics for hypertrophy because just historically I've always been stronger than I looked. I mean, by the time I was about 20, I could do a triple body weight deadlift. So that was like, low 500s at the time. And my overhead press, I didn't really focus on it too much until probably like mid 20s. But I have a video, I don't know if I even posted it on like YouTube or anything, of like 225 for two at 200 pounds. And when I eventually like cut and like stopped doing it, man, I remember like 165 for five felt difficult going back to it. And I was just like, man, like that. I mean, it was just like quick. Now, obviously, it comes back, but I was surprised with that. And obviously, like, because most people know like bench press seems to correlate a lot with body weight, but certainly overhead press does as well. But it was just interesting because like that was one where once I hit that, I almost felt demoted because I was like, man, it took a lot for me to get to that point, and I don't know like I'm not going to do like any like mega bulks anymore to get to that again. So I've done more so like seated pin press and dumbbell shoulder press and whatnot. But the overhead press was one that I, for a couple of years I really enjoyed working on that, and heavy pull ups I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's demoralizing, but I mean, it is such a valuable exercise. I feel like even though I just even that one bulk, I think it put a lot of size on my shoulders. And I wasn't even training it in a very conducive way to size. I was doing a lot more heavy singles than I ought to
Hmm.
have, and not going into the high reps. But I feel like with all the time under tension you get, just because you have such long grindy reps, I feel like lower reps do a lot more in terms of hypertrophy on overhead press than on most exercises. Um, but yeah, it's funny how that works. Same with bench. I mean, bench seems it's not even. I mean, I'm more like I can even get more jacked and all the muscles involved, but if I'm not fat, like it still doesn't work as well. It's like how does that work? But
Well, your bench was pretty
that's bench.
impressive, I think, right? Like, was it at 385, something like that?
I mean, back in the day, I yeah, I could do that. I would hope that I could do 315 right now, but I haven't tried
Really
in forever.
interesting.
But
Now,
yeah, it's
obviously,
never
you
been.
have the muscle mass still, right? Like you said. I mean, I imagine you're more muscular now than when you had bench 385.
Oh yeah, but I'm not as fat, and that's the problem. You don't need to be jacked; you can be
Right,
fat.
right.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I would go up and down. It would always be like when I cut down to something I was happy with. My bench would hover around like 315 to 335. That's as
Mm,
high as I could get. And then once I started pushing the fat, I could get over 350. But
yeah,
it would never stay there. Every time I'd cut down, I could usually hold the line and not go below 3 plates, but it was definitely hard to maintain. Everything else is just works just fine. I mean, I've hit a bunch of even PRs, like completely multi-day fasted and
yeah,
like polls and stuff like that. But specifically on the presses, they want you to be obese.
yeah. I haven't bench pressed in, God, it's got to be like almost 2 years now because I call it about 350. I hit a sloppy 365 and a clean 335. So I'm like, all right, we'll meet in the middle and call it 350. But that was about also like 205 body weight. And again, I just was like, man, because like right now I'm like 180. So I'm like, I have no intention to bulk back up. Like I'm living like pretty lean lifestyle. I'm getting a little bit more into like some calisthenic stuff right now. And I just don't want to bench press and see that it's like 50 pounds lighter than it used to be. So
Yeah,
I'm just doing like other exercises for the time being.
yeah, I hear you on that. It's so demotivating.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask, oh, well, real quick, why were you doing multi-day fasts?
I've been doing that for a couple of years now. I like it.
Oh, really?
It's just I mean, it's just the easiest, in my opinion, the easiest, just best bang for your suck ratio that you can get when it comes to cutting. Um, I got on the intermittent fasting train way back in the day when, back, if you remember Martin Birkin, the Lean
Yeah,
Gains
same.
blog back in the day.
Yep.
I got on that. Like probably a lot of people have that same story. It worked really like at first it sucks. You first do it, you've never skipped breakfast in your life because you're an American growing up. You're always eating 3 meals a day. You think you're going to die for the first 2 weeks, but then after that, it's like, oh, I can do this. And then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, wow, this makes dieting really easy. I love this. I'm going to be in love with this for the rest of my life. And then,
Yep.
a couple of months later, you're like, oh, now I'm eating, even though I'm doing intermittent fasting, I'm eating just as many calories, just
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
shorter window. Right.
So did
But
you mostly do the 16/8 or you also did like full day, like several days of not eating?
well, I did 16/8 for a while. Then I tried one multi-day fast. I did one 48-hour fast. It sucked. I couldn't sleep.
Hmm.
And then once I broke my fast, my bench was really weak, so I thought I'd lost
Uh,
muscle, and I got scared, and I never did it again for another decade.
okay.
But then when I got into it again more recently. I was like, what, 2022 maybe I first started it again. And this time it actually worked better. I didn't have as bad of an experience. I realized I wasn't losing muscle, probably because I wasn't doing bench press because bench press
Yeah.
is so freaking,
Right,
being
right.
so obesity specific. My lifts weren't suffering. I wasn't losing muscle, and kind of got adapted to it and realized, okay, look, I'm getting 3 weeks worth of normal dieting done in like
Yeah,
three
pretty
days,
much.
and
Right.
it's really, really, really not that bad. Like I would say, once you get adapted to it, I would say like the discomfort of a full fast bottoms out at roughly the same level as like 1,000 calorie a day deficit. So it's like, you know, you're dieting. It's not the best. It's not like you're not living it, right? But it's also not like the end of the world.
Right.
I've done much lower calorie stuff. I've done like 1,000 calorie a day at various points, not various points, like at one point. I tried the protein sparing modified fasting,
Yeah.
which I hated.
It's almost
Like
like
ultra
worse
low.
because it's like, so I similar story, 2011, I got into intermittent fasting. I've done it on and off over the years, as many would point out. There's no magic benefit to it, but it's really nice to be able to still feel full while dieting. And it's convenient, right? And so that's great. And then I've done two 72-hour fasts, and I actually do a 24-hour fast every Sunday night to Monday night. I have a very busy Monday, and it's just super convenient because I tend to eat more on the weekends. And then I have this fast, and it's great. Like, I don't even think about it. Like, I'm just working, and then I get a nice, like, off like a protein shake or something on Monday night. The two 72-hour fasts were fine. I felt great energy wise. I felt great like GI wise, just to have like, just nothing going on digestively. And you also realize how much time goes into food prep and just eating the food. I mean, literally, it was like 2, 3 hours a day that I just had. And I was like, wow, like there's not, and not even that. There's just such a distraction that you can give yourself if you know, hey, I'm going to eat at like, 10, 2, and 6. And you kind of like, if you're working, you're like, well, it's only this long until I get to eat again. And then I can, like, if
Yep.
you want, you can really waste a lot of time between deciding what to eat, logging what you're going to eat,
Mm-hmm.
prepping what you're going to eat. It's just, so you kind of almost get a little bored on a fast day if it's like on a weekend, because you're like, huh, like I got to find something productive to do. And I felt fine. I didn't lose any strength. I remember doing like 25 pull-ups the day after my 72-hour fast. And my best was 30, so it wasn't quite a PR, but I hadn't done them in a while. So it was like
Yeah.
I seemed fine, is the point. I don't do them regularly at all, the 3 day ones, but in my experience, it was fine. But I think 24 hours, if people want to do that once in a while, it's completely fine.
See, I actually hate 24 just because
Really.
it's like, I feel like the first day is the worst because you haven't fully gotten into that.
Mm.
You haven't fully adapted to it. You're not fully, I don't like to get into the, like, the
Process and all that.
chemical underpinnings too much just because you're not actually directly accessing it. I can say there's growth hormone, I can say there's stem cells or all that nonsense, but I can't see stem cells. So I
Yeah.
say I don't feel as good. You know what I mean? So it's not just trying to be. I'm not just trying to be a luddite. I'm just also trying to keep at the level that I can actually speak from.
Right.
But yeah, I just don't feel as good on the first day. So I feel like if I'm gonna do 24 hours, I want to continue on to the part where I
Oh,
start to feel a
interesting.
little bit better and then get more out of it. So that's why I like 72, just because you get that first day out of the way, and then the second day is usually a little bit better. Break it on the third day, but it's not so long that it just like it feels like it's going to be forever till it ends. Like when I did 6 days, it like those
Oh, wow.
day
That's long.
day
Yeah.
like 3, 4, 5, just kind of it's
Oof.
like it's like, oh man, this thing's never going to end.
Is that the longest
Still
you've
managed to
done?
pull five. Yeah, and it worked out fine. I didn't. I'm confident I didn't lose any muscle. I pulled 500 for three one handed on the last day of it before eating. So that's a
500
little
for
rep
three
PR.
one-handed deadlifts?
Yeah, I
Wow.
was using a strap, so it didn't count. I mean, it's not something I try to PR. Like I haven't tried to. I haven't tried like strap rep PRs that much at that weight. So it's not like
Oh,
I
man,
was
that
like
sounds great to me.
beating a PR that I tried really hard to. I mean, with the one hand deadlift, you can lift a surprising portion of your two hand deadlift if you practice at it. My PR just with hook grip is 500, so
Wow.
I hit a rep PR, but it's with straps, so obviously it's going to be easier than using hook grip. But yeah, it's not a huge PR like something I've been working on forever, and I finally hit it. But it's like it just goes to show you're probably not withering away and dying to quite the extent that some people might
Yeah,
be
yeah.
believe.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think, and
And
there's
that's
definitely like an individual response to it. Because, like, again, I feel great on it. But I never really, like, you get some people who they say they feel so dramatically different with like different diet schemes and whatnot. And I kind of, I mean, again, if I have like a big, like, breakfast of pancakes or something, I'm going to be in a little carb coma. Yeah, but like for the most part,
Hmm.
like I feel great on those 24-hour fasts. But again, big caveat is I'm very busy on Monday. I'm going from patient to patient and all
Yeah.
this, so like I don't really have any time to think about it. But I agree with you. The protein sparing modified fast can be tough because then it's like you're still eating, but you're just
Mhm.
unsatisfied every time you eat. You know?
Exactly. Yeah, I had a grudge against Ronald McDonald for years because of that. I didn't appreciate him as much. Well, I mean, I still get kind of bored whenever he talks about science, but man, I love his shit talking.
Yeah.
He's a gym. Um, but yeah, that's one bone. That's one bone I have to pick with some of these science-based guys. Is their treatment of fasting? They've been really they've been doing a lot of fasting doesn't work triumphalism, just like celebrating no benefits to fasting found, and they just never mention that all the studies are on very short durations where
Mm.
they're not showing any additional benefits. And I mean, the research we have, I don't have PubMed ID on me, but it looks very preliminary, but it does indicate that you do start to get some novel benefits around like 3 days.
Mm.
And usually the studies that these guys are like saying fasting doesn't work with have like 24 hours as a maximum, where I think most fasting advocates would say, yeah, you're probably not getting any special benefits other than fat loss, but you probably do actually with a long enough duration. Plus, I just think that's where that's where the benefits of just getting so much fat loss going on for kind of a minimum of suffering kicks in. Like, I mean, if you can do a 3 day fast, you can literally do like 3 days worth of regular diet or
Yeah.
3 weeks worth of regular dieting in 3
Yeah,
days,
you're
and
creating a huge
it's really
deficit.
not that bad. Yeah,
It's
it's I mean
not.
it's really not that bad. So
I
it's
think it
just
can
it's just a really good
also,
ratio.
yeah, and it can also fit into your lifestyle. Like I'll tell you, like some people are like, oh, you got to eat the same thing every day, and I very much do not do that. I enjoy food, and I like to eat more on the weekends, and so my calories are all over the place. And anybody who's watched my channel knows I have done extensive testing on myself, and I have Excel sheets going back literally forever from when I got into this. And for me, as long as the average calories is the same, I'm generally fine. So I'll eat, could be 4,000 calories on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then it's a 24-hour fast on Monday. So it's like, 500 to 1,000 calories. But then I'm still very busy with work like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it might be, let's say, 2,500, whatever. And to me, that's just a very natural way to eat because I have more time on the weekends. Like maybe I'm going out with family, maybe we're going to a restaurant, whatever. And then during the
Mm-hmm.
week, I'm so busy. It's like I don't even necessarily want to think about food. And so, not that I would caution people, as in, I don't want people to then have fasts so that they can binge. Don't have a 72-hour fast so then you can eat like 10,000 calories the next day. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying that you can certainly afford more calories on other days when you can seamlessly then kind of fast or partially fast on other days.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I would say it's probably going to be a self-correcting issue. If you try to do a 72-hour fast and then binge immediately afterward,
Yeah.
you're not going to repeat that mistake twice.
Yeah.
Just good luck and stay near a bathroom if you try that one.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think that's one of the cool things about the longer fast. I think it like it's kind of hard to binge afterwards, right? Right. I mean, we kind of like almost normalized bulimia in certain
Yeah. Yeah.
subsets by calling it cheat days. Like you have
Right.
your you know
Right.
you have your diet for a while, and then you have your cheat day. That works because you're keeping the system on and primed. The people who do eating competitions don't necessarily just starve themselves in preparation for the eating competition. They have little appetizers to keep their system going. So
Mhm.
with kind of traditional dieting, you keep the system on prime, it's ready to go. So when you want to do a binge, boom, there you go.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, not only is it not appealing when you get, I mean, at the end of a long fast, you kind of don't want to anyway. Just even a little bit, it's like kind of fills you up, and then you kind of know, like, hey, if I push the envelope here, it's not going to be good. I'm going to take it real easy getting back into eating. So you
Yeah.
do kind of just ease back into just like completely normal eating. And sure, you enjoy your food more, but you don't.
Mhm.
You can have things you enjoy, but you're probably not going to ridiculously overconsume because you're probably not going to want to. And if you do,
Right.
yeah, not going to be so good. So
Right.
I think
Right.
that's. But we're still going to go with that. It's like you say, it does allow you a lot more flexibility to just be like a normal person. Like everyone now, it's like the holidays, so all the fitness influencers talking about what you do on the holidays. Just like
Oh, dude, I hate the
whatever, man, eat
post
your
when
normal
people are
food.
like, okay, here's how to approach Thanksgiving. Fill your whole plate up with the greens, then have all the protein, then you can have a little bit of the carb. And I'm like, bro, this is Thanksgiving. It's once a year. Eat what you want to eat, like relax. It's just, I mean, again, I'm not saying binge, but if you're not like 5% body fat, you're not going to have some giant rebound. Like just eat normally and eat what you want, or even have
Yeah,
more. Like I'm going to have 2 or 3 pieces of pie. You know what? It's not going to matter 3 days later. It just
yeah,
gets ridiculous.
yeah. It really is. I
Yeah.
mean, you're seeing now a trend. I'm seeing a trend of like obese fitness influencers talking about how they recover from eating disorders and how they have to just like constantly be eating all these treats or whatever, not to restrict themselves and not get the eating disorder. It's like, and what they're preaching, being able to eat normal foods and not having to eat like strictly clean foods and all that. But it's like like exactly what you're preaching is what people who do fasting actually can get, except we don't have to be like 35% body fat to get there. It's like you can eat ice cream.
Yeah.
You can do all this stuff and fit it in as long as you just have some periods where you're making up for it. And it totally works. It totally works so well with productivity and business. I think I'm going to do a fast next week. I'm bulking right now, and
Okay.
it's actually going really well. I'm starting to. I think my arms are actually finally growing. Got it.
What are they
I'm
at?
getting the preacher curls locked in from. Yeah, I've been doing those based on
Basement bodybuilding.
basement bodybuilding and all. The preacher curls going on. Just trying to train the brachialis a little more with some
What are they measuring
variations on
now?
hammer curls. What's that?
What are they measuring? Your arms?
Yeah, I've got one just above 17 and one just under. And if I
Okay.
get a pump, I can get them closer to 18. So
Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
go with pump measurements.
There you go.
Hopefully, this bulk we can get under both over 17,
Yeah.
and then the other one a little bit closer up to like 17 and a half maybe. But yeah, the point being, like, it's finally going well, so I don't want to stop eating, but like it's just been so I've been in so much brain fog and having difficulty with, like you say, just carb comas and stuff. It's
Yeah.
hard to be productive. I feel like I would really benefit mentally from just a fast, because I remember when I last year I was trying to write my book while bulking, and that was a struggle.
Mm.
And then as soon as I switched to cutting, did a couple fasts, it's like it just the last like 30 pages just exploded onto the
Yeah,
page
yeah,
just
yeah.
so quickly and easily.
For
So
sure.
I think even though I'm in the middle of a bulk, I'm going to actually do a 3-day fast next week just to hopefully get my brain
Yeah.
back to where it needs to be and be a little bit more productive.
Well, that's awesome, man. I think I'm realizing I'm going to have to get you back on because I still had several topics that we're just not going to have time to get into. I want to get into everybody jumping on TRT. I want to get into the belt squat, donkey calf raises because that was what I was going to say. I just started doing those after hearing your video. I started doing those like 2 weeks ago. Core work, calisthenics. There's actually quite a bit I want to get back on. So if you're willing, we'll get you back on for a part two. And then I want to hear a little bit about this book that you wrote.
Okay, yeah, absolutely, man. I'd be down for that. Um, so yeah, the book is called Old Time Lifts for Modern Lifters. It's just basically detailing a lot of these lifts from the Bronze era, the period from the late 1800s to 1930s, and then the Silver era, which I guess is 1940s, to the introduction of steroids, which was in 1958. Don't let anyone tell you that they were using steroids before that. There's just no evidence that that's actually true, and if they were, like, they were trash and probably didn't do anything anyway. But yeah, so a lot of this stuff has been forgotten about, lost, not practiced anymore. So my thing was not just to do like a history book about this is all the stuff. We're not going to put it up on a pedestal. This is the old school secrets, or everything in here is some great old school secret that's going to magically make you jacked, because there was good ideas and bad ideas at that time just as well as now. And no, it's so my goal with it is to kind of find the value in these forgotten lifts and see which ones are most valuable for modern lifters, which ones kind of fill holes in the modern program, and kind of direct you towards those. I've got them all described, what their benefits and uses may be. I try
Awesome.
to I try to put them in. I try to put the most detail really that they've ever been put into print in the book. And I've read a lot of the primary sources, and they're great, but they are a little bit. The writing style is actually a lot better than most people today. They're really well written, but as far as actually technically describing the lifts, the technical detail is just lower than what we would expect today. So I tried to put the most like technical detail on a lot of these lifts that is in print. But anyway, the whole point of it, I tried to kind of direct people towards the exercises that are most going to fill holes in modern programs, such as the Jefferson curl, which trains spinal flexion and just full range of motion in the posterior chain muscles in a way that we just don't see a whole lot of today. The pullover, which has been more or less forgotten because people like Paul Carter are too stupid to understand it. And stuff like sissy squats, things like that I think are most valuable. And then some of the fun lifts that are maybe showy but maybe not as practical.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm gonna let you know that I'm not going to tell you it's some like magical secret that's going to make you jacked if it's not. So
yeah.
that's kind of the theme. Just let's list it all. Let's tell you exactly how to do it as well as possible, but then let's direct you as a modern lifter who I don't want you to stop doing stuff that's working for you. I just want you to find those parts that were forgotten, maybe for not so good reasons, and that you should actually add back in, if that makes sense.
Awesome, man. Cool. So yeah, if it's on your website or like a link anywhere, I'll certainly put that down below.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll send
man,
that your way.
thank you for taking the time. I know we had to rearrange it. Thank you for the flexibility from last week, and thanks for the debate there. That was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fun to have a conversation. I didn't even really talk about the my odd lifts, which is cool. It's nice to be, I mean, not that I like talking about them, but it's nice to be talking about a bunch of other stuff, debating, having fun. So that was, yeah, it's been a fun conversation and a nice change up. So yeah, I'd be happy to come on anytime you'd like.
Awesome, man.